Folks, I think, as I said, Accra, lovely. So we've got London, Cape Town, Johannesburg, Ghana, Namibia, all represented here today. So thank you very much, and fantastic for to have you with us online this morning, or this afternoon, should I say. Tim Holmes and myself, both senior partners at Sudar. And really the purpose of this afternoon is to provide you with a little bit more information with regards the Applied Directorship Programme. But I think from both Tim and my point, important or critical, that we don't really want to be talking at you for the next 50 minutes or so. We'd really like to make it as participative as possible. So if I could encourage you to please put some thoughts in the chat box. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to put them in the Q&A section as well. But perhaps more importantly, if you'd like to chat to us, then raise your hand and our admin will unmute you. And if you're brave enough to put your camera on, join us in the webinar for a conversation. So I'm really going to encourage you all to participate, ask as many questions as you like, because I'm sure after a few minutes you'll be pretty tired of hearing my voice and Tim's voices. So Tim, anything from your side in terms of opening or opening thoughts?
No, I guess, as we've said in the past, the main thing about the Applied Directorship Programme is making sure that people keep an open mind. So whatever we suggest to you, we would like to make sure that we're challenging you, and the program, the intention of the program is to make sure that we challenge people's perceptions of what was happening in the past. So thinking about the bad habits we've learned, what do we need to unlearn? So I would be very, very pleased if people can ask questions about the way things have been run for a long time. And if we say something that's different from that, then let's dig into that, because those are the really good conversations. Like something that comes up saying, you can't own a business. And everyone, oh yeah, of course I can own my shareholder, of course I can own a business. Those kind of things where the common understanding of something has either shifted or was always actually misinformed because of we didn't understand the details behind it. We didn't understand the way the law actually worded something. It's just become the way we talk about things. I'm a business owner. All of those kind of common language, which is actually just incorrect. So yes, if we come up with anything like that, we throw anything in the pot and someone says, no, but that's not right. Yeah, let's test it. Let's have that conversation.
So I'd really like to park that thought about why you can't own a business in terms of the way that we understand it generally. But perhaps maybe just from a context point of view, and within the context of the Applied Directorship Programme, you and I sit on a number of boards, and we sit on a number of boards together in some cases. From your perspective and your years of experience sitting on boards, why is understanding governance within the context of the ADP important or relevant in terms of this program and what it's taught you or given you in terms of enhancing your ability to sit on boards?
So I did lots of the theoretical governance courses before I joined Serdar. And then sitting on boards, I realized they're quite difficult to implement. So the analogy that Serdar talks a lot about is you can't learn to climb a mountain by reading a book. You can understand some of the technical aspects, but you need to actually do it. And you need to actually gradually get and attack bigger and bigger obstacles, bigger and bigger challenges. And I think the biggest learning for me, and particularly doing the Applied Directorship Programme, we first launched it, was there's a certain amount you can do based on the theory. There's a certain amount you can learn from other people who are existing directors. But it's a bit like learning to drive from your parents. Things have changed since they did their test, for one. And we all learn bad habits along the way. And then we perpetuate them because the board that we're part of has a way of doing things. very few people have gone back to the beginning, gone back to the source and said, okay, well, is this still relevant anymore? So Companies Act has changed. And I know that in Serdar's lifespan, we came up with a theory, we came up with a methodology, but I don't think Carla or I really thought that this was as robust as it actually has become over the last 10 years. So it's going on a board, starting with some theory, and then realizing actually there's an awful lot of application that we've done badly because we've learned from the wrong people. We've learned from people who haven't done training. We've learned from people who didn't really understand the law at the level they needed to. So it's transitioning in my journey was definitely that transition from manager to director is a much bigger jump than you ever realize. And even people who are in the position of being directors probably don't realize where they need to be. And that was certainly something we really drove the development of Applied Directorship Programme. And it's when I'm talking to people who've done it, that's often their biggest shift. I now think about governance in a completely different way, or it's fundamentally changed the way I think when I'm in a boardroom. Those kind of phrases come back to us often from people when they get to the end of the program.
So perhaps let's just, given that we've got an audience or participants today from across Africa, the UK, etc., this program isn't South African centric in the sense that governance, yes, while there might be specific codes relevant to a country, the principles, the underlying principles of governance remain the same. And the purpose of this program is to really teach and help aspiring directors, current directors, understand the basic fundamentals of governance. Would that be an accurate way of summing it up?
Yes, because and even the Companies Acts now across the world are getting closer and closer to each other. So the UK one's virtually the same as the New Zealand one, the same as the South African one, the same as most of the colonial countries dotted around the world. They've got very, very similar Companies Acts now. With King 1, 2, 3, 4, we're at now the new ISO 37000 standard. They're all converging on a very similar understanding of what best practice of governance means. And then you've got local laws that apply below that. But the principles that are being taught, the principles we're moving towards are really becoming more and more consistent. So for example, we came up with this governance compass, 12 years ago, 13 years ago. If you look at the ISO 37000, they've got the same shape and they've got the same pies, but in a different order. Theirs goes from the inside out and ours goes around in a circle, but it's all the same stuff. So everything is coming together. King 4 is talking about the same stuff. ISO, as I said, it's all talking about the same stuff. So those basic principles of governance are applicable in pretty much anywhere. And then it's the local laws about what it means to be independent, or what is that different for a bank versus a large corporate versus a private company. Those might be specific to the particular jurisdiction. But generally, if it's an English-speaking country or a Commonwealth country, the laws are very, very similar. The Portuguese, the Francophone, those laws are different, but the principles are still the same. So we're working with Mauritius, which is largely a French colony, and a lot of the businesses are run by French business people. We're running the ADP there because the principles are the same. Their law is different, but the principles are exactly the same.
Yeah. So, if I were enrolling on the ADP, regardless of where I am in the world, essentially the basic principles of governance are going to apply to me, and no problem. And in terms of where I am in my career as a director or as an aspiring director, to what extent is this relevant to yourself, who's been on boards for, I don't want to say a long time, because that would make you sound really old, and I don't think you are. Versus,
it's just a number, Kieran. It's just a number.
Versus, hey, I've just been appointed to my first board, or I'm looking to be appointed to a board. Would I find relevance in this program and in this process?
Yeah, I mean, the way the program's structured with the deep dives in each of these segments, so we're breaking it down into chunks. So there's a month about strategy and direction, there's a month about organizational culture, a month about effective leadership. If you are coming at this and you've never been a director before, you will absorb a certain amount of information. You haven't got a framework to hang it on yet. So there will be a focus on understanding the foundational stuff and then building from there. If you don't understand the foundational stuff, there'll be even further down the depth of content that's covered will be where you start to engage with it. So we've had people on the program who've been on multiple listed boards. We've had people on the program who've been directors for 20, 30 years. All of them have come out of it saying, wow, there's a lot of gaps in my knowledge. I didn't realize there was so much I still needed to learn. Or I've revised my learning because what was relevant 10, 20 years ago is not relevant anymore. So I think there's an opportunity for anyone at any level to benefit massively from attending the program. Where I think it's very important for people who become moving into their first directorship position. We see it with private companies where they've now got a big investor coming in and they've realized they need to actually have a formalized board. If you haven't upskilled yourself to be at least the same kind of level of understanding of the foundations and principles as the independent directors or the VC investor coming in to your board, then you're always going to be at a disadvantage. You're not going to be able to be confident, say, no, but hold on, that's not the way it is. We need to be doing X, Y, Z. They're going to dominate the conversation. They're going to push your business in the wrong direction. And you hear so many stories about, oh yeah, but people brought independent directors in and they just took over the business. Well, they took over the business because the executives weren't at sufficient level to push back. They just accepted everything that was coming at them as being correct, accurate, and largely, as I said before, if you've learned from the wrong people, if you've developed bad habits, what they're saying may not necessarily be true, may not necessarily be accurate or even legal. So it's making sure that when we walk into the boardroom, we have confidence, we know what we're talking about, because we've been through, even if it is simulated board meetings, we've got that confidence to say, I know how to do this. Now I just need some practice. I've climbed my first big mountain. Now I need to do it again to build and tweak and adjust my skills based on practical experience. So it's definitely gets you in the door, but it also fills in so many gaps that we just don't address when we're doing something on a day-to-day basis. We don't go back and study our engineering degree again or our accounting degree again. There's always gaps that we need to be continuously filling, and being a director is absolutely no different.
So have you seen, maybe wearing a slightly different hat or taking a different perspective, have you seen a shift in boards and boardrooms over the last 10 years, for example? What have been some of the most dramatic shifts or changes that you've observed?
So the New Companies Act made a massive difference in South Africa, and as I said, it's very similar to ones that were introduced in the last 10 years elsewhere. The move towards understanding that you have to be, as a director, working in the best interests of the company, not shareholders, is a slow and a fast shift depending on which jurisdiction you're in. Americans still very shareholder dominated. Other countries have definitely shifted quite substantially towards understanding there's all stakeholders that you need to be aware of and looking out for. But it's that legal and cultural shift to, if I'm a director, I need to be doing everything in the best interest of the company, is starting to happen. And a lot of governments are pushing it now. Some of the stock exchanges are pushing it now. I think just generally the culture within larger organizations is starting to shift in that direction now. There's still a heck of a long way to go because people are still getting away with a lot of stuff, but the law's catching up. Now they may be settled out of court, but at least something's happening. It's appearing in the press more, governance issues, wherever you look, there's a lot more awareness that that's the problem, not something else. So yes, I think there's been a shift across multiple planes, legal principles, the general regulations within industries, investors being much more aware that good governance helps, banks being much more aware that good governance helps. All of those things are starting to come together now and putting a lot of pressure on businesses to do things the right way.
So, Tim, just help me out here, or explain for me, when you're talking about directors have a responsibility to make decisions in the best interests of the company.
Yeah.
Directors have a fiduciary responsibility, correct?
Yeah.
So what exactly does that mean if I have a fiduciary responsibility?
So the terms in the law are quite general, and some of them talk about the reasonable man test, or reasonable person test. Some of them talk about very much the male energy of the way a father would look after a child. So as a director, we need to have that kind of challenging, testing, making sure that they're given the opportunities to grow. It's a little bit more of a disciplined approach than a nurturing mother kind of energy. So it's thinking about, if this business was my child and I was a good father, how would I look after and care for it by challenging it, make sure it had the opportunity to grow, giving it all the resources it needs to develop into the best person it could be, because we're talking about a juristic person here. And that comes back to that point about not being able to own a business. You can't own a person. You can't own a juristic person, because it would be slavery. So it's that father looking after a child. The child is a person, is the company, doing everything in the best interest of that child, of that company, and then helping and supporting it to grow. And that's looking at all stakeholders, all of the people that, or the organizations that are impacted and impact that juristic person, that company. So it's suppliers, it's clients, it's staff, it's the environmental, it's the legal, it's the communities. All of those things can have a seriously detrimental impact on the business, and likewise the business could have a massively positive impact on those stakeholders if done right. So it's much broader thinking that needs to happen than when we were just focusing on getting a return for shareholders.
I think the thing, one of the realizations that I had is that when you sign and agree to become a director of an organization, what it implies is that you are personally potentially liable for decisions you make in the boardroom, which again brings us back to understanding governance as a basic principle. Or the basic principles of governance makes it that much kind of a self-protection, self-preservation thing, if you're sitting on a board, to know that you are asking the right questions because your understanding of governance is broader.
Yeah, and as you say, I think it's that stick holding over, saying, well, you are legally liable for the outcome of this decision, even after you are no longer a director. If you were a director at the time a decision was made and it goes horribly wrong in 10 years' time, you are liable for that decision because you were the one who made it, or part of the team that made it. So there's definitely that hanging over your head is a much stronger, more persuasive legal thing than it was in the past. And I think that's also forced people to think a lot more about their conflicts or potential conflicts, because now you have to leave the room if there's a conflict. Before, you just weren't involved in the conversation, but you can still, get very dominant people in a boardroom, and if they're conflicted and they're still in the room, they're going to have a massive influence just by being there, just by making a funny noise or the way they look at someone. They're going to influence that process. The fact that you actually have to prove that and demonstrate that you left the room if you're conflicted has also shifted the needle. And those conflicts are starting to be better understood. If you own the property that the company's leasing, then you can't be part of the conversation when the company's thinking about, do they want to expand? Do they want to contract? Is this the right building? Those kind of things, which we didn't even think about before. Well, of course I own the business. It's my business and I own it makes sense if I pay rent and I build up an asset base and blah, blah, blah. That's the way it is. It's very common. But when you start talking about it from a business perspective about, well, actually, are we paying too much rent? Is this building the right fit for us? then the person who owns the building has to leave. And that's really difficult if you don't have independent directors, because it's usually the same people as are in the room making the decision. So it all becomes very complicated if you don't start to separate those hats out and start to realize actually there's conflicts and there's legal ramifications and.
Yeah, you founded the business, you're the sole shareholder, you're the MD, you're the landlord, you're the tenant, you're all of those kinds of things. And of course, we've seen our fair share of epic failures and governance failures over the last few years, which again just really sort of highlights the importance of understanding what your responsibilities are as a director.
Yeah, and the three hats, be really, really clear of which hat you're wearing. So are you wearing the shareholder hat, which tends to be a selfish engagement with the company because you want a return on your investment, you want a dividend, you want something back for all the time and money you put in to found the thing, or when you bought shares, etc. But the director hat has to be completely selfless. As I said before, you're there to be thinking all the time, 24/7, about what's in best interest of the company. And then the executive one is, and we had I had a conversation with our board meetings recently, where the executive was thinking that having the strategy conversation, this is what we don't want to do. And you could see the executives going, it's going to be a lot of work. Do we really want to do that? Who's going to be responsible for making that happen?
Yes.
It's a different hat. It's got different pressures, but it can't dominate the conversation in that moment.
Yeah. And in fact, sometimes, just the example that you're referring to, sometimes the best way to actually resolve it is to actually have a hat printed with that name on it and say, right, now put this thinking hat on, a little bit like Harry Potter with this hat on, think with this hat on and only with this hat on. It was very interesting to observe that individual's facial expressions the minute he put the hat on and had to change his thinking within the context of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's good.
Perhaps a good time to just pause and just check if there are any questions or anybody would like to make a comment or ask us a question. As I say, more than happy for you to use the chat